Welcome to the Startup Grind.
We have the founders of, or some of the founders of StartupsHK. StartupsHK is the oldest, biggest grassroots organization supporting entrepreneurship here in Hong Kong.
Does it work? Can you hear me in the back there? Oh, sorry, what was I supposed to do? I was just trying to turn it on. Introduce myself?
Yep.
I'm Casey Lau, one of the co-founders of these fantastic gentlemen of StartupsHK. I guess we'll go into more from there, but I also have a day job. I work with SoftLayer, which is a hosting company, and we're opening a data center in Hong Kong. And I do work with a lot of startups around the Asia region as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Soo, co-founder of StartupsHK. I grew up in Hong Kong, and I basically, studied all the way here until 18 and went over to the US, spent 11 years there before coming back in 2009, trying to set up my own startup. Nowadays, I run like a fashion company that my wife launched a couple years back, as well as StartupsHK.
So my name is Jon Buford. Let's see. So I definitely was not born in Hong Kong, but I've been here for quite a while. I started out in the toy industry, which is how I came to Hong Kong to start with back in 2000. And then I've done a few different startup companies. When I met these guys, I was doing my first software startup, which crashed and burned promptly after that. And I started BootHK. And then now currently doing Makeable, which is adaptive manufacturing company. We also do 3D printers, things like that. So, yeah.
All right, great. Well, let's start this off. Where did StartupsHK come from? What's the history? What is StartupsHK? Can you give us a history and a rundown from when it started and how it started until where you are today?
Dave McClure. Yeah. So, 2009, December, Cyberport hosted a conference there for startups and angels and things like that. And all of us, everybody that was part of StartupsHK at the beginning attended that conference. Somebody in the audience asked Dave, so if we were going to go out and do something after this to continue doing something that's significant, what would you recommend us doing? And he said, go to a coffee shop, start meeting up, and just build a community. And that's literally what we did.
I mean, we really first started meeting up. Actually, I met Casey over Twitter. So one thing I want to highlight is Twitter is an amazing networking tool. When I came back to Hong Kong in 2009, I really didn't know anyone. I was trying to launch my startup. So I started dabbing into Twitter back in New York just before I came back. And once I came back here, I realized that there's a lot of these people hang out on Twitter. There was only a handful, which means that it's very easy to connect with others. So I met Casey there, and then I met John after, and then so we started hanging out in this coffee shop. And when we stay in this coffee shop, we'll go through this roundtable discussion to discuss about our problems with our startups. Do you know this person who can help me with this, or we'll help each other out, answering each other's questions. And then this group sort of just grew from there. It went from 3 of us to 4, 6, and then 12. And then we start filling up the whole Habitu. We're like, what's going on, right? So so we started to, and then one day we actually came up with this idea, we were sitting in a coffee shop, all of us, and we were thinking hey, okay, so each of us have a startup. And, we're trying to let other people know that, in Hong Kong, there are actually cool startup like ours. So we thought maybe we'll do a conference and showcase our startups. So at that time, there were 6 of us. We thought, hey, okay, a conference showcasing 6 startups, that's pretty boring, maybe not enough. Right? So we thought, okay, we'll enlist other startups. So we actually started to look around in Hong Kong, who else are running startups. And we actually went through a process of actually asking for people to come in and join, and we'll vet them. And we'll actually do a lot of practice sessions on people's pitches, including our own. And to make sure that when we actually stand in front of the public to present our startup, we'll present it well. And so that actually gave birth to the Startup Saturday idea, which actually we pulled together in 2010 in a span of 2 months. 6 of us who are running our own startup just join force and like organize this whole event, pull together the sponsors. And for that one-day event in Cyberport, 500 people came. And I think that's really how.
Well, and we went up to Cyberport and we said, we want space to host a conference. And they said, how many people are you going to get? And we said, 200 people. And they almost laughed. And they said, even with our marketing budget, we can only get 300 people to come to our conference. And then basically right before the event, we were like, we're going to need another room. Do you have anything available? And so that worked out. And then we did another big one a year later, filled up a giant church of all things. And Dave McClure was at that one swearing up a blue streak, which was ironic at best. Yeah.
And then for the second event, the highlight was Airbnb's Brian Chesky, the CEO. Actually, also made a second keynote, which was a blast because he was actually here for Asia D. So we purposely scheduled the second Startup Saturday to coincide with the same week as Asia D, so that we may potentially be able to pull. And Casey did an amazing job in actually getting Brian Chesky to come and speak at the event.
I told him there are a lot of girls there. So he fell for that and showed up anyways.
Well, and we
There were no girls there.
and we hijacked Geeks on a Plane too for that one.
Right.
Yeah. So we hijacked both Asia D and Geeks on a Plane.
I guess one of the major things that came out of the first Startup Saturday was Jon had his startup and he decided he wanted to open a co-work space. And I didn't even know what that was. What's a co-work space, right? And he went on the stage and pitched Boot HK, which would be the very first one in Hong Kong. And everybody got 10 minutes to pitch their idea. And so he went up there and pitched his Boot HK idea. And as soon as he stepped off the stage, a handful of guys went up to him and said, we're going to give you money for this right now. That's like the Silicon Valley dream, right? Like this kind of startup thing doesn't really happen very often.
Of course, I wasn't actually trying to make money off of that. That was like, we should do this for the community, and this is a really awesome idea. We need this. And what was amazing is they were happy to support something that was not necessarily, a big investment that they're going to get return from, but they wanted to see the community grow. Yeah. So that was cool.
Because we outgrew the coffee shop, so we couldn't fit all these people in a place. So we thought we'd put them into some kind of new co-workspace idea and rent out desks and let people network together. And so Boot HK was in Wan Chai near the Hopewell Center, and it was about 1,000 square feet. It was one of those old kind of Chinese Hong Kong offices. So this guy went in there with a couple of guys and a couple of hammers and ripped the whole thing apart. So I sent some photos over. Maybe we'll show them up later. But there's pictures of it before and after, and they're quite funny because just destroyed. And then we had just one huge table in the middle, and every Monday we would do Startup Monday. We just very creative names we always come up with. Startup Saturday, Startup Monday. So Startup Monday was obviously on a Monday, and it was for startups, and they've just come out, and we just go around the room. I'd love to do it tonight, but it would take us a couple hours to go through everybody. But basically, this guy here, Corey, doesn't have a name tag, but he'd introduce himself and tell us what he was doing. And so people kind of knew what everybody was doing, so they could network with themselves, each other afterwards. And again, we'd have a speaker come up and do half an hour talk about something to do with startups, either raising money, building a website, whatever.
Well, and we would get, for some of the popular Startup Monday events, we would get 50, 60 people in this little tiny space.
Which is the size of just this area right
Yeah, exactly.
So then we knew there was something happening there.
Yeah.
And Boot HK actually is a very interesting space at that time. I think being the first co-work space, it really got a lot of attention from entrepreneurs all over the world. So when people actually come in through overseas, we would get these interesting people that are starting sitting inside this space. I think I remember that this one time there was this kid. He was I think 22. And he was sitting there working. I was asking, hey, what do you do? Okay. He said, I'm traveling the world. I was like, okay. What are you working on? He said he made this iPad app. I mean, that was in 2011. And I was like, what app is that? He said it's Sound Notes. And actually I searched on it, it's the top 10 apps of the year of 2011 or something like that. So you get these amazing people that actually come through the co-work space. And it's something that I've never, imagined before. And I think, I'm really glad that, Jon pitched Boot HK at that time and really came up with this space for us to host all this like StartupsHK events there and really build up the community.
I look at BootHK as my rebound startup. It was it was actually I was really burnt out from my last one, and I was just like, okay, I need to do something. I need to do something constructive, but I'm not really ready to start the next company. Okay, let's make a co-work space. And
Are you crying?
Huh?
Are you crying?
Oh yeah, I'm tearing up.
This is very emotional.
Actually, I'm curious. How many people were at BootHK for whatever? Like,
All right, great. You guys are old.
Lucian, you lost weight.
Great. Thanks for that intro. So let's move on into the general Hong Kong scene. So who can give the best history of startups in Hong Kong and where it's been since before the dot-com boom all the way to today?
I think Casey might be a good one because he was in.
So I guess we had, I mean, to give you an idea of how it's evolved, right? We all had startups that we're no longer a part of when we started this group, right? And John's gone through like 3 of them.
But go back before we started. Like go back as far as like you were here for the last startup, the last one, right?
You want to go through dot-com boom? Okay, so I don't know about that. I was like in
just go back
diapers at that
yeah.
time. So dot-com, who's here from the dot-com time? Nobody. Whoa, nice. So so dot-com time, 1997, 98, up to 2000, 2001. Of course, you probably know the Amazon took off, eBay, all these old brands now that nobody even goes to anymore. Started Yahoo. Wow, that was exciting back then. Hong Kong got a lot of the action as well. So what I see back then, it's about a 2-year delay in whatever happens in Silicon Valley happens in Hong Kong about 2 years later. So as it started to pick up here, I guess there was some kind of banking community meeting saying we need to give money to startups, or back then dot-coms. And so they'd have a meeting just like this kind of a thing where somebody's talking on the stage and there's half the room were these dot-com idea people and the other half were all the bankers. You could tell by the way they dressed. And everybody's waiting for the speaker to stop talking so the deals can happen. And really, it's the urban legends. You see people doing, okay, here's my business plan on the napkin. And somebody, here's $1 million. And that actually happened. I've seen that happen. I was like, whoa, this is crazy.
Well, somebody told me there was an advertisement on the side of a bus that said, tell us your idea and we'll promise to try to not laugh.
Yeah, that's true. Tech Pacific, yeah, that was their business model. Yeah, crazy. So that did pretty well until the whole thing exploded, I guess. And then the whole thing went down, right? Everybody knows .com exploded. And then, but the internet's not going to go anywhere, right? Technology's not going to go anywhere. So I guess it just kind of went into hibernation for a while. People are licking their wounds and trying to see what's coming up next. And so I guess 2003 is when I guess that Web 2.0 kind of thing started, right? So that Facebook and Twitter and those things started launching and people started getting excited again. And so that's kind of how it came back up again. It's even later than that, right? Yeah. So that's that era. And then the new eras come in.
So it's kind of quiet for. So it's quiet for like 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years, yeah.
So what? There's Edit Grid and Outblaze were kind of during that period.
That's right. That's right.
And
Outblaze,
Six Ways was kind of growing up during that time.
So actually, for Outblaze, I first heard of Outblaze when I was in secondary school, like back in the mid-90s during the .com days. Actually, Outblaze was around at that time, and one of my classmates who dropped out of school actually was a partner of Yat Siu that worked on Outblaze. And then when he was telling me he was making these like games and working on this startup, I was like, what? Like you're dropping out of school to work on a startup? And then the next thing he sold his company to Lycos. I'm like, holy shit.
What is that? Lycos?
A search engine.
Search engine.
Yeah, so he actually sold this thing called My Rice. Yeah, at that time. And then, I think Outblaze just carried on and worked on the messaging system, which they eventually sold to IBM in like the 2000s. And now Outblaze is working mostly on games, like mobile games. Yeah. And then actually the next thing, that came up, I think is OpenRice. OpenRice actually has been around since the mid-90s. It first was, as far as I know, it's being run as a forum. The founder is a journalist. So he was just running this forum out of his own interest, talking about restaurants. But, nothing really happened for like 10 years until he realized that he's sitting on this bunch of, people like discussing about restaurants, and he somehow turned that into a directory filled with reviews. And you know, we all know that they exited to JobsDB later on. And then also when the iPhone launched, I think it definitely is like a significant turning point, I think, in the startup industry. Several, you know, entrepreneurs out here started to build iPhone applications. I think the one that was like more well known is called Anobii, Anobii. They basically built an app, something similar to Goodreads these days. So they actually sold out to HMV Group, I think a couple years back in like 2009 or 2010 or so. Yeah. And so Greg Song, right, he's actually been one of the pioneers of this second era of like entrepreneur. He's a very prolific writer. He writes a lot for Apple Daily, usually on entrepreneurship. Yeah, really good guy with a lot of wisdom on like startups. Yeah.
So then I guess from our first Startup Saturday in 2010, we had about 15 companies or 20 companies pitch that day, and I'd say maybe today only 3 of them are still around. But one of them that launched was Enterproid. So they launched at that time. They're still doing really well. They raised $25 million since then, doing really well. And then there's a company like Spoilt. I don't know if Michelle is here. She's around the corner here, and she's got kind of a lifestyle startup. So she's not taking it public, but she's doing well with it. It's a online gift company. So, you know, I think a lot of them survived, a lot of them died. And as we had these meetups at Boot, and people would tell us what they were working on, I think what happened back in 2009, there wasn't any money. There wasn't any funding available whatsoever. Cyberport was giving out 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, which could buy you, I think, a half a Mac back then, or maybe it's today still, or half an iPhone. So I think a lot of good ideas, because we saw a lot of really, really passionate, really energetic guys come out and do stuff, but there's just no money, so they just couldn't, you know, sustain it. And they can't build any traction here in Hong Kong because, you know, it wasn't really a market for that, and they didn't know how to go more global with these things.
Well, and like back then, I think we were all just looking at online, whatever, you know, like anything. We were consuming anything we could find online and going like, oh, this is what we should try doing or whatever. And I think everybody was kind of, okay, how do we go out and fund these ideas? And so we were trying to approach things from, say, like a Silicon Valley standpoint, but then the resources weren't here. And so we quickly figured out that wasn't about to work. But I think over time, basically, we just started getting traction. And for me, my first seed investor for Makeable, I actually first talked to him at Startup Saturday 2 years before I got funding from him. So it took that long to basically maintain the relationship and, you know, and be able to get to the point that, you know, he funded me.
This sounds so weird, doesn't it? It seems like this is ages ago. It's just like a few years ago, right? Because it's true. All these money guys run around. There was no Hive. The Hive came in what, 2011 or 2012 even?
Yeah,
2012. So there's like a whole change in the last 2 years.
Well, basically, so what co-work space-wise,
HK Commons?
well, so yeah, there's HK Commons and then not the one over in Causeway Bay.
Cocoon?
Cocoon, yeah. So Cocoon and HK Commons kind of popped up about the same time, towards about the second year of Boot HK.
Yep.
And then after that, it kind of just started blowing up.
Yeah. I think the Hive came in and showed a really strong business model for co-work space, and so a lot of other places got into the game. And now they're still growing. So we know Paperclip just opened now. There's another one opening around here soon. And I don't think it's going to end. There's a bunch of them in Kowloon side as well. So I think that from that and each of these places having their own activities and their own events is starting to build the community past whatever we've done. Because we're just doing this as like a part-time kind of fun thing to do and keep networking with everybody. And it's just grown into this giant thing. So we started with 6 guys in a coffee shop. We now have 5,000 members in our mailing lists, on our social media and everything like that. And everybody's still... we've done this talk many times, so still more people keep listening to the story. So it's very exciting that there's more people coming into Hong Kong to do startups. How many people have been here for for less than 1 year? Wow. Okay, there you go. That's amazing. Okay, so yeah, Hong Kong's great. We love it. We think it's fantastic. And you guys, hey, congratulations. It's a great place to be now. We've done all the hard work for you. No, but no, just kidding. You definitely have, I think, a much more warmer environment now for startups than ever before.
Great. Thanks for that. You're making my job easy. That's good. So, until the pizza gets here, then it's over. So why does Hong Kong need startups? Why is it really important for Hong Kong to have startups? Why can't they just rely on banking and real estate and stuff they've been doing for the past 20 years?
Or Chinese tourists.
Yeah.
Or Chinese tourists, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we all need startups. I mean, we all have our passion, right, on things we love to do. And I just see so many people in Hong Kong that are working in miserable jobs all day long, just trying to make a living and pay for their mortgages and like their houses. And, and people are just having miserable lives, I think, like a lot of times. Yeah, and I think like somehow if you have a shot or have a chance to be able to participate in something that you enjoy, I think it's a great opportunity. Like something that I think was much tougher to do back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the pre-internet era. However, I think the game has changed, like with the social media, like internet and all that. I think all of us have like a much bigger channel to voice our opinion, our ideas, to share, interesting, products that we build, and test to see if it works in a relatively much more lower risk manner than before. So I think, that's one of the reasons why I think startups are very much needed.
I think that Hong Kong is definitely follows the trends. Okay, we don't really start the trends on this thing. So the investment in startups is just something that people are talking about all the time. So people want to get involved in it. They have their money in the stock market. They have their money in property. Those things are fluctuating. So where else can I put my money? Hey, I hear startups are very interesting. So this is something I think that people start to move into now, and we're seeing a lot of angel investors are getting involved in startups. I find that the only issue is that they're not really technical enough to understand a lot of the startups. I'm sure a lot of you run into this. You talk to an investor and it just goes over their head. But I think, so that's the thing. We have investors. We need a certain type of investor as well. That those are the kind of investors you hear about in Silicon Valley that understand technology as well as the business side.
So what are some of the things that make Hong Kong unique when it comes to startups? What are the challenges? What are the advantages of being here for a startup?
So I think the market is definitely like that. That's the biggest thing, because it's kind of a weird market in terms of it's enough people that you can do something for the local market, but then if you wanted to have something that's going to continually grow, it's not likely that you're going to find something that you can do just here. So it's kind of an odd size in that sense. It's probably there's enough people here though where you can try a lot of different things potentially. There's a lot of good resources here. From a business standpoint, it's amazing because tax-wise, just running a company, being able to just set things up in a quick and efficient way is really amazing. And then being able to access China, but then also potentially the rest of the world, winds up being like the two strengths. Everybody thinks of China, but then if for me, if I were in the U.S. doing what I'm doing, I would be tending to do things for the U.S., which it's going to be a much more limited space. Where here, you can kind of pick and choose your markets much easier.
I mean, if you talk, I think people, finding the right people is always a huge challenge, I think, everywhere, including Hong Kong. I mean, when we actually first started, like StartupsHK, a lot of us had that problems, like, trying to hire the right people, get the right people on board. And even in trying to get people on board, if you have no money to pay them, after a while, if your thing doesn't take off, people are gonna start looking for other things to do, and your team will start to disintegrate, and like that will be pretty much the end of your startup, and it happened to me too. So I think that is one of the huge challenge. But right now, at least, like, we're getting, you guys look at like the number of people that are here. I mean, we have all these people. You really need to put yourself out there, talk to people. Don't be afraid of sharing your ideas and tell people like, what you want to do, because like, no one is gonna really like go away and start building stuff like because you told them, right? That's basically one of the things that people are really usually afraid of. Oh, I'm working on this stealthy thing, I'm not allowed to tell you right now. If I tell you, I'll kill you. But we really don't believe in that, because like running a startup is really, really hard, and like you have no time, like no money, and then if for someone to be able to push through, definitely it's very challenging. Yeah.
So probably funding, it's still like we're still getting kind of the funding channels in place and smoothly going, I think. And then mentors and advisors, I think building up a stronger network of people that are easy to access. But I think a lot of that's basically kind of where we're at in the cycle. We're kind of getting a lot of that in place. So it's kind of a good time right now, where over the next few years, I think is going to be a lot easier to get things up and running than it has been for the last like 4 years.
So one of the temptations that any place outside Silicon Valley has is to try to recreate Silicon Valley. And the Silicon Valley investors come out here and they say, don't do that. Don't try to recreate Silicon Valley. Use what's unique about your location. What do you think are some of the startups that could do exceptionally well in Hong Kong and have a real advantage by being based here?
Well, I'm a little biased, but I think anything having to do with products and manufacturing, personally, is kind of where I think is a big growth sector. So even things like fulfillment or whatever, I think there's a strong base for doing physical products here, but doing it in a new and a better way. So instead of doing it, say in China, where you have a lot of restrictions on setting up the company and a lot of overhead. I think finance is an obvious one.
Yeah,
so,
fintech, yeah.
Yeah. Do you
mobile, I definitely think mobile, fintech, enterprise-driven startups are going to find the best success here in terms of funding and finding a marketplace. Probably a happy hour app. I've told this George a million times, haven't I? Everyone's heard this one. Happy hour app, probably not a good idea. Or GPS locating of happy hours or buffets, also not a good idea. Not a real problem.
Retail related, I think. Kind of like with the malls going around, I think that could be interesting stuff that can be done with like iBeacon, like launched by Apple on the iOS system. Something like that would be interesting, I think. And also, of course, Internet of Things, like it relates to the hardware that Jon talked about, like all these devices right nowadays that could actually be hooked up to your Wi-Fi network, and you can actually remotely control anything through your phone, just because these devices are now online, like including your fridge or your aircon, or for that matter. Yeah.
So if you were talking to somebody from outside of Hong Kong, I just moved here last year. Other people, a bunch of people here have just moved here within the past year. If you were pitching somebody from outside on why they should come to Hong Kong and do a startup, what reasons would you be giving them?
Because you could land here and have a meeting with somebody probably that same morning. That would be one. People are very much, effectively, it's a pay it forward type of mentality where they've been helped by somebody else, and so they're very happy to share contacts or to introduce somebody or anything like that. It's just how it works here. So I think that's one really strong point.
I've been all over Asia looking and meeting startups, and I have to say Hong Kong MTR, it's the best thing ever. It's worth moving here for. You get around anywhere really quickly. I can do 4 or 5 meetings a day. Have you been to Jakarta? Have you been there? That's not a startup ecosystem happening there anytime soon.
I have been, but I didn't get away from the airport.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you see as being the future of the startup scene over the next 5 to 10 years? It's been a pretty big change just in the last 2 or 3 years. If you could look into your crystal ball 5, 10 years, where do you think it's going to be?
I definitely think that, yeah, it'll accelerate from here, definitely. I think last year was a big year in terms of deals and new startups and all these great ecosystems. Because I think another thing you have to understand is the investment mentality, right? They need to see that there's a community like this of people and places like this to give it a little bit more validity, I guess, in the marketplace rather than a bunch of guys in Boot HK, right? I mean, it was the original one, but if I showed you a picture of it, there's no way you'd put money into that place. It was like really, really disastrous, right? And it was like working out of a garage. That might work in Silicon Valley, but it's definitely not going to work out here, right? So thanks to these new places, I think this is really good, and it's bringing a lot of new kind of people into town and different kinds of people. I get an email once a day about from some investor or some investment group looking for startups. Wow, then where were they a couple years ago, right? A lot of people died because, companies died because they didn't have this kind of people. But maybe people died, I don't know. We haven't seen that guy, Joey, in a long time. Maybe he didn't make it. But definitely think that the influx of new people, the great environment in Hong Kong, and work like from our great friends at StartupsHK, bringing people in. They're going to do a lot of good stuff over the next 5, 10 years. Who knows what's going to be like in 10 years. But yeah, the Silicon Valley thing of the Asian Silicon Valley, I hate that. It'll never be that. It's a completely different world over here. We don't have all those technology companies building up over decades. So this will be its own thing. And I also hate, what is that, Silicon Harbor and all these kind of silicon words. There's no silicon here. It's weird. But definitely the startup technology business will be big here. It will grow here. Companies will originate here and go global from here. And because it's a great place to start up, So I'm looking at, personally, because I've done more traveling than these guys, I definitely see Singapore and Hong Kong as the 2 main hubs here for a global startup penetration market will happen here. Japan is too Japanese, China is too Chinese, and the other ones are still building, they're still growing. So I think the best chances you have are here in Singapore, definitely, in terms of funding, talent, ideas, people to network, people to meet, and how to grow your business.
I think if people go back to finance industry, they die inside anyway. So, so again, I personally, I think there's potentially going to be, basically, I think we'll see product manufacturing coming back to Hong Kong. I think it could be a really interesting hub for a new generation type product that gets into market in a different way. And yeah, so I think that's the only other part that I would add.
I definitely want to see the local community get more involved. The local like Hong Kongers like really getting into this space. I think we'll see that in the next 5 to 10 years, and especially like recently, like Google started working with Soo and HK, and also like I think the next thing that is gonna probably change is the education system. Well, the schools are trying to catch up, and I hope they really try to do a better job. If not, anyway, the kids are going to read it outside on Khan Academy or there's like a coding startup that's teaching kids how to code right now, and I think that these are great initiatives and getting people to start thinking out of the box, because like I think the education system out here, or it probably happens in other parts of the world, is that it's really lagging behind. In the sense that nowadays, recently we just found out a Hong Kong startup just got funded, and one of the team members is a 17-year-old kid, right? And it's like that. People don't need degrees anymore, like if you can actually deliver. And as an employer of a startup, like the last thing you really want to see is like a degree. I mean, you really want to see them deliver. And nowadays you could deliver when you're like 10, 11, 12, like. It really does not limit, like the fact that having a degree doesn't mean anything anymore. The thing a lot of students actually think is that, oh, I have a bachelor degree, I have a master degree, so you should pay me 100 grand a year. No, I'll pay you if you show me that you have this amazing thing that actually attract a lot of users, a lot of you can prove so much these days with nothing. And like that actually says the most out of like what you can do. And I think that is going to happen more in the next 5 to 10 years.
So kind of related to that, the government's definitely taking note of startups. And I think you're going to see a pretty big shift where the government's going to do a lot more, whatever they can, but within the constraints that the government is working within. The Hong Kong government has an interesting relationship with, with its constituents as far as they basically only go as far as they're not going to be blamed for when something goes wrong. And so we're finally hitting a point where they're seeing that if they don't support startups, they're going to be blamed for not supporting them. And so it's an interesting thing to see the shift away from being very conservative in that towards seeing what they can do to support it.
Okay, last question I'm going to ask is if there's somebody here who's thinking about doing a startup right now, looking at jumping in, what would be your advice to them?
Don't do it.
Well, yeah, that to some extent that is true.
And then breathe, and then think. Yes, I really want to do it.
I would say like kids, like keep it simple, stupid. A lot of people, like when they think of their ideas, they think of like this whole. Well, I mean, you should think long term, but like when you think of the big picture, you want to distill it down to the core of your idea, and not try to do too much on your first iteration. Like you want to really be able to describe your idea in like one sentence. If you can't, you need to do a little bit more work.
Don't depend on getting investment up front. Try to build up traction, try to build up whatever, your proof of concept, something that you can actually show and say, this is mine, and this is why I can justify getting investment at that point. A lot of people, they get it in their head that you get investment and then you go out and you do whatever it is. For Makeable, in order to get investment, I designed a product, put it up on a website that I threw together using just free tools, got it featured on Engadget, got 40,000 hits from Engadget, made $10,000 of sales that week. And then I went back to the investor and said, okay, either cut the check now, or I'm going to go do a deal somewhere else. That's the position that you want to be in. Don't get the investment first.
I guess my tip would be do something that you really, really want to do, because you'll be doing it 12, 20 hours a day. You'll be breathing and eating it, smelling it.
And you can't stop.
If it doesn't, and you can't stop. So if you're doing something because you read it in TechCrunch, then don't do it, right? Because you don't care about it. You have to do something that you care about, and of course that you can figure out a business model for. But whatever you do, and it's also not just a cool little trick you learned on programming for iPhone or something. It's got to be definitely something that you believe in and live and want to breathe every day. So if you're into, I don't know, if you're into fashion, then that would be your thing, right? You wouldn't want to do it like myself did a fashion site that I don't really care about. But it's got to be definitely something that you're willing to live and breathe it and make it work, and until it dies or doesn't die.
Actually, that's a good question, Gene. Like, how do you feel about So I guess it would be Style Nearby. Like, how do you? Are you still passionate about it, or?
I am, which is why I'm actually still thinking about it. How to actually make it work, the business model. So actually, Style Nearby is the startup that I was working on when we actually came together to form StartupsHK. It's like a mobile platform that allows boutique owners and designers to showcase their products wherever they are, physically. So yeah, you can basically window shop on your iPhone, basically. And so actually I was gonna say, I lost my train of thought. Actually, like the thing about like doing something you love, that is how we built up StartupsHK. I mean, that is what it takes. I mean, if you're not doing something you love, you can't do it for like 3 years, 4 years that we've been doing it. I mean, really, it's the passion. And also, the other thing that really drives and motivates people is feedback, right? The longer you take to work on your product and not launch it, the more burnt out you will be, because you won't be getting any feedback. So when we actually start putting together like coffee shop meetings, right? We're getting these people turning up. And when we start growing the community, so that is like oxygen to us. That is like what's feeding us and keeping us going. So I would totally advise launching fast. You know, don't delay. I mean, you know, don't try to make this like into like you know, perfect product before you like launch it. It'll never be perfect. So I think that's one of my key advice too.
Yeah, so the startup that I was doing when we first started StartupsHK, like I mentioned, it crashed and burned pretty soon after we got together. Well, no. So I remember I was meeting with a potential investor, and I was talking about, so it's a project management startup, like really exciting, right? And I'd been doing this for about 2 years, and I was talking to this investor, and then we switched over to talk about Boot or about StartupsHK or something within that scope. And he was like, there's the passion. Like, so the thing that made me realize I'm done with this. Yeah, I'm burnout. I have no real interest for this. And at that point, like it was basically okay. You know, it's time to bury the baby, basically. So I think you do get into the middle of something, and sometimes you feel like you should just keep going, just because you've invested time and money and your reputation or whatever into it. But a lot of times the best thing you can do is, you know, really step back and go, you know what, this really isn't getting anywhere. Let's go do something else for a while, and maybe in the future we can get back to it if you're really still passionate about it.
We'll take a question or two from the audience. Is the pizza here yet, by the way? It is?
Smells like it, yeah.
Okay. We'll take 2 questions from the audience. Shout it out, and I'll repeat it on the mic. Or we'll take no questions.
Or no questions.
Now that everybody knows the pizza's here, that just, yeah, nobody's going to ask. Oh, we got one in the back. When does a startup stop being a startup?
I think it's more, like to me, it's more of a culture. So I think you could be a big company and still be a startup at heart. But then if you look at it from I think at some point you do hit a point where you've got operations that are continually going, and you've kind of gotten abstracted from that seed. But I think it's really more just the company culture. I think you could still be just like Facebook, I would still think that they're a startup at heart. A lot of the ways that they would run things would still be that same culture.
For me, I think that a startup, you know, is something that's always trying to figure out this business model that can sustain itself. So when Jonathan says that, you know, like Facebook, part of it is still considered a startup because it's always trying to figure out new ideas to monetize and to make like new business work. And the other part of it, like the ad engine that's really working already, like that part of it's probably not so much of a startup. It's more like a more mature company. And same with Google for that matter. I mean, they're always launching new products. So they, like I think nowadays, like people are buying into this idea that even mature companies should be a startup and partially to start innovating.
Oh, I think that a startup stops being a startup maybe when you delegate too many things away from what you are. I guess it starts to lose directly from the founders. And I start to believe it starts to fade away when other people come in, when you need to hire more managers and people to take over. I think that's when you start to lose it. There's too much delegation, too much committee things. So you try to keep that as long as possible. Look at Instagram. Instagram's great. They make a lot. I don't think they make any money though, but they got bought for a lot of money. There's like 16, 20 people in that company. I'd say that was still a startup, no matter what.
Just so SoftLayer. How would you look at SoftLayer, like in terms of the mentality? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think they're definitely not a startup anymore, but they were a startup. A bunch of guys left a big infrastructure company, put their credit cards together and bought a bunch of servers and did what they could do before and did it again, right? So I definitely, but now it's quite a big thing. But they still like to think they have startup DNA still in their blood, and that's why they have this Catalyst program that I run out here in Asia. Another thing I also find funny is some people in Hong Kong don't like to be called a startup. That was strange. I guess it has negative connotations in the old days when it's just like, oh, you're just a new company, who are you, right? Now it's like everybody wants to be called a startup, even like 5-year-old companies. They're like, I'm a startup still. I want to be a startup, right? So it's quite interesting about that, I think.
All right, one more question. There in the back. Blue sweater. Yep, you.
Dan. So we give you advice, you launch fast and you create traction. So when you get a signal that with the right business model, you go for funding and scale up.
Okay, so the question is, you launch your business, you get some traction. What's the signal, or when do we get the signal that we're ready for funding, that we're ready to scale?
Well, you iterate all of that. Like you're continually doing that over and over again. So like for Makeable, we've gone through 3 or 4 funding rounds, basically. Some of them being very much just rolling, well, like maybe 6 months later, you get another round of funding, right? Same thing with the business model. You get to a certain point and you say, okay, we've got a good point that it's solid enough that we can explain where we're at right now, and we know what we need to get to the next point, but you don't really know what's beyond that next point, right? So it's all very iterative. It's not a go out and get funding for the next 4 years or whatever. It should be you evolve the business and you evolve the funding needs and everything as you go. So
I have a sheet from a talk from I think Y Combinator or whatever, and they tell you what that is based on industry. So like e-commerce, enterprise, whatever, and they tell you how many seats you need to sell to be valued at, say, $3 million. So I think if you hit those numbers, that's a good gauge, and I'll give it to you after this. I can't find it right now on my phone, but there's definitely a number that Y Combinator, which is a big accelerator in the States, gives to their people and does a talk about to let them know when they're ready, and that's not unachievable, right? It's like 1,000 paid users at $25 a month, something like that, then you're ready to go, and it's growing by like whatever 10%.
All right.
Can I ask one question?
Oh, he's sneaking one in. Oh,
Talk
right.
about the difference in the startup business that you do in Hong Kong and Singapore, and why Singapore? Why not Hong Kong?
Okay, so the question is,
You suggest you were saying earlier about business startups. Best place is either Singapore and Hong Kong.
so Singapore and Hong Kong.
What's the difference between the two?
What's the difference between the two?
they're evil twins. Honestly, like at least to me, like you're either kind of Hong Kong or Singapore in terms of your operational style.
Do you like durian? There's your answer. Definitely Singapore is ahead of us in terms of funding. So the government does give away a lot of money. You can go with a PowerPoint deck with 2 slides and walk away with 25K, maybe US. All right, that's how easy it is. If you're a Singapore resident, they want to support the people in their country, okay? And I just had this conversation with some guys in the back there earlier. We think it's, although of course your definition may vary, but we think that if no money, it makes you a bit more scroungy, more scavenger-like. Figure out any way you can make money or raise money. So a lot of our guys, to be honest, in Hong Kong, went to the States. They went to the States. They went to Silicon Valley and went, hey, we want some money. They got the money and came back. That's amazing. They don't even stay in the valley. They get the money and leave. I'm like, really? That's amazing, yeah. So I think it's that kind of, and that's a startup. I think that's the dedication, right? If you can just go walk up to the government and say, hey, yo, give me some money, they'll be like, okay. And I've been there. There's a lot of fluff there because of that, right? So here's a little bit more difficult. So at least there's some, fences to jump, hurdles to jump to get through to make sure that you can last. Right? So that's what I think, for sure.
All right. Thank you to StartupsHK for presenting tonight. Let's give them a round of applause.